Hey everyone, welcome to the 5th season of Travel Tales, a podcast by Afar. I'm Aislyn, and yes, I host the show. Each week on the podcast, we hear stories of life-changing travel from poets, writers, entrepreneurs, authors, and so many more. And this season, we'll be sharing short Q&As inspired by each episode that you can only find here. This is Travel Tales. Alysa, welcome to Travel Tales. It's such a delight to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
We kind of first connected, I don't even know if we met at that event in New York, the TED Talk event that you first kind of shared your story at, but it was such a profound one. I think many people that day were very taken with the message that you were communicating. Was that the first time you had done something like that?
I had definitely done like public speaking before, which I enjoy, but that was absolutely the first time I had to memorize like a 10-minute talk word for word. So whole new ball game. Yeah,
absolutely. And as you were just sharing before we hit record, you've been there for 10 years.
Yeah, in July, I'll have worked there for 10 years, but I first started even volunteering for them like 14 years ago. So I actually can't believe how long I've known some of my colleagues at this point. Yeah.
So what does your kind of day-to-day look like?
To be perfectly honest, I think it's a little more, it can be a little more boring than people might think when I say, oh, I'm a polar bear biologist, and they imagine some really cool stuff. And I've got to do some very cool stuff. I'm very fortunate. Yes. But most of my day, honestly, I work from home unless I'm traveling, and it's, you know, emails and Zoom and spreadsheets and budget tracking and grant writing and reporting and meetings and connecting with colleagues all around the world, which, you know, and I love it, even the more tedious stuff, but a little less glamorous than some might think. Yeah.
Do people just expect that you're out there on the ice and snow with polar bears every day?
I think at first, sometimes when I say, oh, I'm a polar bear biologist and I live in the Yukon, they're like, well, there's no polar bears in your town. I'm like, well, no. Thankfully, there's not. I don't have to see them every day to kind of be forwarding their conservation, luckily. So, yeah, I think it sounds cooler than many of my days are. But it's still, you know, even my worst day is pretty good.
That's a good thing to be able to say in our lives.
Yeah.
But you have spent time in Churchill, which is where I understand most of the polar bears live and operate.
Well, polar bears do live across the Arctic, but Churchill is the best place to see them, the easiest place to see them. There's more access to polar bears in Churchill than the vast majority of Arctic places. So I've been very lucky to spend a lot of time in Churchill doing field work or viewing bears just outside the town. And I think of it as my second home now.
What was your first polar bear encounter like?
I was on a tundra buggy. Yeah, I'd gone up. I just started my master's degree. I was still learning all the basics about polar bears, and they sent me up to Churchill in the fall, which is when the bears are gathering by the coast. They're waiting for the sea ice to refreeze on Hudson Bay, and people go there to view the bears at that time of the year. And Polar Bears International needed some support, and so I got sent up to kind of learn the ropes. And went out on a tundra buggy knowing really nothing. I spent the night, didn't see anything. And then in the morning, someone's like, oh, look, watch that rock, watch that rock. And sure enough, it stood up, that rock. And it was a polar bear. And just getting to immerse myself like amongst the bears for a week as my first experience with them, being surrounded by them all day, every day, was pretty incredible.
Why do you think people are so attracted to and kind of taken in by polar bears? Like, what is it about this particular animal?
You know, it's something we talk about a lot, and there are these incredible examples of polar bears being used in advertising or marketing or all sorts of pop culture things around the world where people are never going to see a polar bear. They really do capture people's attention. I think bears in general people tend to love, teddy bears. I don't know if it's because they have some human qualities. They're so smart. They seem to have relationships, feel emotions, figure things out. They're huge, which is fascinating. And then polar bears specifically, maybe their uniqueness, their way of living that is so wild. I don't know, but they really do capture people's attention.
And how did you wind up in the job that you're in? Because it sounds like, and as we'll hear in your story, it was a bit of a kind of indirect path at times.
Yeah, completely accidentally stumbled into polar bears, but I'm very grateful that I did. I did always love wildlife and animals and wanted a job kind of somewhere in that realm. But I went to school for my undergraduate degree, and I was doing a lot of work on like mice in the wild. So live trapping mice, a little bit of toad stuff. I helped with a badger project briefly, all these little things, and I loved it. And then my supervisor on all that work had gone to school with Andy DeRoche, who's a polar bear biologist, and encouraged me to reach out to Andy for a master's degree. And I put it off, and finally I was like, the worst he can say is no. And he said yes. I timed it just right. Wow. And I, had decent grades and a scholarship, so he took me on. And I never foresaw working with polar bears, but I'm kind of glad I made the jump. I still love mice, though. I truly do.
It's such a jump in terms of just size alone.
Totally.
But do you get to work with mice anymore, or is that just your side
no,
love?
Yeah, they are my side love. I've been very focused on polar bears over the years, but I love watching mice, and they definitely don't freak me out. So, hey, you never know.
How much do you travel every year to do research in person or see these magnificent creatures?
Yeah, every year looks a little different. And, post-COVID, we are traveling a little less than we used to. So you can always find me in Churchill every fall. And that's the late October, early November for, 3 to 4 weeks these days, and that watching the polar bears. And then otherwise, I just got back from Churchill. I went for the winter. So the polar bears are all out hunting seals already on the ice, but I went up for Northern Lights season, and that is when moms are emerging from their dens with their little cubs. So in late February and March there. And then I do travel to see colleagues or go to events or do public speaking where it makes sense for, the carbon and the event and things like that. So I could travel, once a month sometimes, or I'll go months without traveling. It really varies quite a bit.
Why are polar bears important? Like, what do they represent for us in terms of animals and climate change?
Mm-hmm. They did kind of accidentally become this symbol of climate change, which I know some people are kind of burnt out by it. I get that. We hear about polar bear burnout, like, oh, these polar bears, but they truly are this incredible symbol. They really are. And so when I talk to people, I'm like, I get it, but they really do represent, first of all, the whole Arctic ecosystem, because they are this top predator in the Arctic. They have what we call an umbrella species effect on the whole ecosystem. So everything we're doing to protect polar bears is really protecting the entire Arctic ecosystem. And that Arctic ecosystem is so critical to the entire planet. And it's so hard. It can be really hard to make those connections. We have a lot going on, and you might be down in like Texas and like, how does the Arctic affect me? That's crazy talk. But it really does. The Arctic, we like to call the sea ice Earth's air conditioner. It is helping cool our whole planet. So by helping protect the ice and the polar bear, we're helping all of us maintain a stable Earth. So they really are this, this iconic species it is going through a lot of change right now. We are seeing them struggle in some areas of the Arctic, but they're also giving us plenty of advance warning that we know exactly what we need to do, and we still have some time to do it. So let's go.
Do you find that people, when they are there, that that kind of settles in a more real way than it does when, I don't know, if you were looking you have a webcam, right? Where you can see the...
Yeah. So we work with explore.org to run a series of webcams across the tundra. And that ideally helps people connect a little more with polar bears, seeing them on the video. And it's expensive, and it can be hard to get to Churchill for a lot of folks. So the webcams are the second best option, I think. But for those that can get there and see a wild polar bear and get really close to a wild polar bear, we really believe it impacts people in a different way. And we hope that people kind of go home feeling more inspired to make some changes, or to even talk about bears and what's going on in the world with their friends and families and colleagues.
And what do you, like, if you were a traveler going to Churchill for this experience, what happens? What is that like?
Yeah, so there's all sorts of different ways people can experience Churchill. One of the classic ways would be you have to take a plane or a train to Churchill. You can't drive. So folks usually fly up from Winnipeg. And then you'll stay in the town, or you can choose to stay on a tundra lodge out on the tundra. That costs a few more bucks, but you get a lot more polar bears around you. And then one of the main ways people experience polar bears is on these buggies. And we work with Frontiers North Adventures, and they have the tundra buggies. So there's like these monster trucks, and you go out in this kind of particular area. You don't just get to go all over the place. You got to conserve the region, and you go out on these vehicles. You drive really slow, and the bears are just there. They're waiting for the ice. Bears that don't want to be there leave, but many are, I think they're bored out of their minds, to be honest with you, at that point. So they hang out, they'll come look at you, you're an exhibit to them too. And we've seen amazing things out on the tundra. So we get a lot of photographers up. We've seen, there's sparring. It's one of the few places in the world that people get to see sparring. So that's when the bears are playing with each other. Oh, wow. And the males really like roughhouse. It is so cool. We see moms with cubs and other wildlife, of course, foxes and things like that. So it's a pretty special place.
So when you're there to observe, how does that kind of translate into the work that you do?
For us, observing the polar bears in Churchill in the fall is mostly about the outreach. So it is about building those connections. The research stuff happens usually earlier in September and right now in March. And that's when there's like the handling of the bears and that. But that fall is really that time to just enjoy them. So one of the things we like to do is we do bring up like polar bear researchers from all over the world. And a lot of these researchers, they've only or mostly seen polar bears from a helicopter or worked with them when they're, tranquilized and things like that. And then to be able to bring folks up and just sit amongst polar bears and watch them, you just get this whole new appreciation for them. And they're so funny and charismatic. Oh, really? And, oh my gosh. I'm anthropomorphizing hard here, so don't, pin me on this word, but I swear there's some of them that just love the camera and love showing off. Like oh my God. It's like when they hear those clicks, they're so funny. It really brings us so much joy. So that's our favorite time of year. It's also the time I get to see all my colleagues. Like I, work from home. We have a lot of remote workers, so we all get together and watch the bears and just kind of reaffirm why we're doing this work.
Absolutely. I love that you have polar bear divas.
Oh, I sure think so. I think some of them, they definitely have different personalities. I'll say that. Some are more aggressive, some are super chill, some are more playful. Like you can see their own bears. And we do see that in the data, to be honest, too. With our tracking data and that they're all making different choices out there. So it's one of their strengths for sure, that there's lots of different ways they're approaching their habitat. It kind of makes it hard for scientists sometimes to pin down exactly what they need and what they're going to do. But they're so smart.
What's one of the memories that you feel like has been the most transforming, or when you've been in that moment?
This mom with her brand new cubs walking across. And I think that was when just I can't even explain it. Just this habitat is so bonkers that anything lives here. Like it feels like you're on a different planet. You're on ice. It's moving. It's freezing cold. It's dark. And there's just these tiny little baby bear cubs, navigating this world. It is wild. And so seeing that was just like, whoa, this is fragile and this is such a strong species, but they do need help. So that was very impactful. And then a more recent memory I have that it sounds so simple, but it really was like, oh yeah, right. It was in the fall. So a year or two ago in the fall in Churchill. So no ice yet. And we say all the time, the reason polar bears need sea ice is that they use it as a platform to reach seals. So seals can outswim polar bears. So the bears really need to use the ice to sneak up on the seals. And so there was this seal that I don't know what the seal's problem was, but it was coming. It was in the water, of course, but it was coming very close to land, and it was like taunting this polar bear that was on the beach. And the polar bear was watching it, and it pacing back and forth. And at one point, the polar bear rushed into the water to try to get it, and the seal was gone in like half a second. And then the polar bear laid down and put its head on its paws, like it was so bummed out. And then the seal came back and was just like bobbing around, and it really drove home like, wow, these bears do need the ice. The seal has full advantage and is loving it and just taunting this poor polar bear. So it was super cool to see it play out in real life. Yeah.
That is a brave seal.
Oh my God.
I don't know.
What's going on here? I had some sort of, I don't know what he was doing, but he seemed not that worried.
Confident.
Feeling good. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you have a daughter, correct?
Yes. Yeah. She's 4.5 right now. Yeah.
Okay. Does she like polar bears? Like, what's her relationship with polar bears at this point in her life?
It's so funny. She'll say, mommy has to go to the polar bears when I do travel, and she's okay with that. And I have like, a skull and fur and stuff here, and she's just like, thinks it's so normal. And I don't know. I think she takes them for granted. I went to her preschool recently and did a little polar bear thing for all the kids. So they're like 3 and 4. And so many of the kids were so excited. And a few of the moms later, a week or 2 later, would come up to me and say, oh, wow, so-and-so loved it. And they were telling me these like facts you said. And I was like, wow, some kids actually remember facts. I would bet almost anything my daughter doesn't know a single fact. And she knows they're the biggest bear. She does know that for sure. But it's so funny. But I think they're just so normalized for her. She's like, whatever. Her favorite stuffy's a polar bear. And, she's like, oh, yeah, polar bears, whatever. Yeah.
That's hilarious. They're just, part of her ecosystem. So why would she learn facts about them? They're just there.
It's like our cat. He's like, oh, yeah, it's just there. Yeah.
Polar bear, cat, mouse.
Same thing. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you would want to add about why they're so important, or your work, or traveling to see something like this?
Yeah, I think I want to add, because I do get this question a lot for people. We talk about, of course, polar bears are threatened by climate change, and carbon is the main issue in the atmosphere, trapping all this heat. But we don't want people to not visit polar bears or fall in love with nature because of the carbon footprint. First of all, there's so many ways to offset that now, if that's what you'd like to do, and we do that when we can. But we do think, maybe optimistically, but I do think that people making those connections and falling in love with the bears can make up so much when it comes to the travel. Like, we do really think that being able to travel is important. And if you can't, which is completely understandable, there's lots of places I haven't been able to go that I would love to go. If you can find a webcam or learn about it in different ways, and that connection really makes such a difference. And I will also note, we are optimistic. So there's a lot of doom and gloom. For sure.
Yes.
We do have some challenges and hurdles out there. Absolutely. I'm not trying to say we don't. But we are really optimistic in the fact that Arctic sea ice itself does not seem to have a tipping point. So there's at no point have we lost it forever. We know it's very responsive to changes in temperature. We can absolutely protect it and get more of it back over time. And the advances in technology we're seeing are so impressive. And ultimately, climate change is about humans. It's about protecting ourselves. So we are optimistic that we will get to the point where we're protecting ourselves, and that will help protect the polar bears. So we really go hand in hand with them. Our future is intertwined. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll link to your story, and can't wait to hear more about what you do.
Thank you.
Okay, that was our show. I'll include a link to the full episode below, and please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out.